I'm David Hutchins with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, discovery of Iran's purported nuclear intentions is ringing alarm bells in Washington. The future of Egypt, our youthful revolutionaries being sidelined by the Muslim Brotherhood and the military. And online dissent in Palestine. You can disagree, but it might get you into trouble. It's all ahead on The Voice of America. First, we turn to Iran. Analysts say an International Atomic Energy Agency report released this week makes it difficult for Iranian officials to claim their country's nuclear program is for peaceful purposes only. VOA's William Ide in Washington reports that it appears the dynamics have changed in the Iran nuclear debate.
The International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, has detailed how Iran has carried out computer model simulations of nuclear explosions, worked on detonators, and made more than a dozen designs for fitting an atomic warhead on a missile. Matthew Kronig is a political scientist at Georgetown University here in Washington.
This report makes it pretty clear that Iran has a weaponization in mind. They're doing the work they would need to do in order to make nuclear weapons. So it's harder for them to maintain the facade that this is purely a peaceful energy program.
Such clarity, analysts note, will put more pressure on Iran. Britain, France, and Germany have raised the possibility of additional sanctions on Tehran, but Russia and China object. The IAEA report does not say that Iran has a nuclear weapon, but it says Tehran might have an ongoing development program. Analysts also say that despite international opposition, Iran continues to press forward with its nuclear weapons program. The Iranian government rejects the report, calling it a fabrication, and accuses IAEA chief Yukiya Amano of being a puppet of the U.S. government. Tehran also says information in the report came mostly from a laptop computer that was stolen from an Iranian official in 2004. Editor Valerie Lindsay of the website IranWatch.org says Tehran's denial was inevitable.
I think it's a more difficult position to take today in light of the report because the IAEA has gone into great detail about the source of its information and the fact that it does not come from just one member state, read the United States. So while an initial cache of documents, perhaps coming from the United States, may have gotten their investigation going, at this point the information is coming from a lot of different places, including from the agency's own investigations.
Iran is not the only country that will have to deal with the report. Elliot Abrams was Deputy National Security Advisor for Middle East Affairs for former President George W. Bush.
One effect of this report, I think, is that it does change the debate from the question of whether Iran is developing nuclear weapons to the question of what do we do about the fact that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. I think the IAEA report has kind of settled the first argument.
Middle East expert Ray Takei of the Council on Foreign Relations says international sanctions and efforts to delay or disrupt Iran's nuclear program are not working.
We are increasingly no longer in management mode. The management issue is exhausting itself. During the next administration, whomever it may be, the Iranians will either detonate or they won't. So it's time to start thinking about not ways of managing the program, but how do you solve the Iranian conundrum.
Center for Strategic and International Studies security analyst Anthony Kordsman says the IAEA report raises the question of how long to continue negotiating with Iran.
At what point do you actually say the military option has to be used, or we have to decide to let them have a nuclear device? The problem, too, is it's one thing to say that they might have a few devices, possibly over time. It's another to let them go ahead and be able to produce significant numbers of nuclear weapons.
Analyst Ray Takei says it is still possible to put an end to Iran's nuclear weapons program without the use of force, but the time is running out.
In my view, the intellectual challenge here is how do you get the regime, how do you get Iran to abide by its international obligations without the use of force? And that's hard to do.
Takei says he does not believe that Iran possessing nuclear weapons is inevitable, and that in addition to the country's economic vulnerabilities, Iran has political vulnerabilities and a robust opposition movement as well that might interrupt Tehran's quest for an atomic bomb. William Ide, VOA News, Washington.
Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta says military action against Iran could have unintended consequences. VOA Pentagon correspondent Luis Ramirez reports the warning came at a press conference on Thursday.
The U.S. Defense Chief's warning follows the release this week of a report by the International Atomic Energy Agency that says Iran may be carrying out secret experiments for the purpose of developing nuclear weapons. The report bolstered calls by some in Israel's government who have been calling for an attack on Iranian nuclear facilities sooner rather than later. At a news conference with Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Martin Dempsey, Panetta warned against any military action. Panetta said he agrees with the assessment of his predecessor, Robert Gates, that a military strike would only set the Iranian nuclear program back by 3 years at most.
You got to be careful of unintended consequences here. Those consequences could involve not only not really deterring Iran from what they want to do, but more importantly, it could have a serious impact in the region, and it could have a serious impact on U.S. forces in the region.
Panetta said the U.S. and its allies should instead toughen economic and diplomatic sanctions on Iran to change its behavior. On a visit to Israel last month, Panetta warned against any unilateral action against Iran. Israel says it will use military force only as a last resort. Iran says it will retaliate if attacked. Also in his remarks Thursday, Panetta called for an independent investigation of the alleged mishandling of U.S. soldiers' remains at Dover Air Force Base in the U.S. state of Delaware, in a case that has sparked outrage among Americans. 3 employees of the base's mortuary revealed what they said were inappropriate actions that included losing body parts from the corpses of U.S. soldiers, and in one case, removing an arm bone from a dead soldier in order to make the body fit into his uniform for burial, a procedure that was reportedly done without relatives' permission. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, at the Pentagon.
A spokesman for UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon says the UN chief believes Iran's nuclear dispute with the West must be resolved through negotiations rather than military action.
The Secretary General notes with serious concern information that indicates Iran has carried out activities that point to a possible military dimension to its nuclear program. He emphasizes again that the onus is on Iran to prove the peaceful nature of its nuclear program. He reiterates his call for Iran's compliance with all the relevant resolutions of the Security Council and the Board of Governors of the International Atomic Energy Agency. The Secretary General reiterates his belief that a negotiated rather than a military solution is the only way to resolve this issue.
That's the Secretary General's official spokesman. The International Atomic Energy Agency released a report Tuesday saying it had credible evidence of Iranian efforts to design a nuclear weapon, as we mentioned earlier. Recent reports in the Israeli media say Israel has been considering a military strike on Iran's nuclear sites to stop the suspected weapons program. Human rights activists say Syrian forces have killed at least 13 people during anti-government protests around the country today, as the government faces new accusations that it may be guilty of, quote, crimes against humanity. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says most of the Friday's casualties occurred in the Homs region. Security forces have launched a series of raids in the city in search of dissidents, and activists said Syrian soldiers also were killed in an apparent ambush. The casualty figures could not be independently verified because Syria bars most foreign journalists from operating inside the country. The fresh violence coincides with the Friday release of a Human Rights Watch report saying Syrian authorities may be guilty of crimes against humanity for alleged torture and unlawful killings. As Egypt prepares for the first parliamentary election since the overthrow of longtime ruler Hosni Mubarak, liberal youthful revolutionaries are struggling to maintain their political prowess as they face off against a more organized, more established, and conservative Muslim Brotherhood. Meanwhile, the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, or SCAF, seeks to set the rules on how elections will be conducted and what in the Constitution can be changed and what should be left alone. VOA's Carol Castiel spoke with pro-democracy activist Dina Girgis for our Press Conference USA program about the country's immediate future. Joining the conversation was senior Middle East correspondent Mohammed Al-Shanawi.
Let's set the scene for us in a sense, Dina. Many analysts are saying that since the heady days of the revolution which toppled Mubarak, that the military is still firmly in charge, that initially the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces did consult with the protesters. They were given the impression that they would play a leading role, but that doesn't seem to have turned out to be the case. How do you see the situation since February?
Yes, I think that's quite correct, Carol. I think that at this point, I would characterize this as something that started out as a genuine people's movement, a revolution, if you will, that was essentially hijacked into a military dictatorship. So really, we don't have a change in the fundamental systems of anything. Merely, we have a change of faces. The head of the SCAF, as you mentioned, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, who are now the new executive power since Mubarak's ouster, is headed by Field Marshal Mohammad Tantawi, and Field Marshal Tantawi was Mubarak's former Minister of Defense. So very ironic that all of Mubarak's regime is gone except one of these figures who is really essential and at the core of the Mubarak regime. Not only is he still part of the government, but he's actually in charge of it. I think in the beginning there was a sense that indeed these new sort of liberal groups, many of them liberally oriented, bourgeois, modern in outlook, were to have a key role in Egypt's transition. And I think that the SCAF was initially taking into account their role and trying to engage them, but very quickly discovered that they were largely disorganized. I think there was a main common denominator of agreement, which was that we all wanted the ouster of Mubarak. But after that, a lot of disagreement started, and even the Revolutionary Youth Coalition, which is formed of, different ideologically oriented groups, started falling apart a little bit, and they couldn't necessarily agree on a common unifying vision. So we knew what we didn't want, which was Mubarak, but not much more about what we actually wanted, and more importantly, the roadmap for the transition. We only started talking about steps and order of things that we want, meaning do we want a constitution first based on the Tunisia model, which is how Tunisia did it? Do we want parliamentary elections first? Do we want presidential elections first? I think many of those debates unfortunately came in too late. Allowing the SCAF to then step in and sort of lay down its own transition plan, which many say will serve its own interests in maintaining sort of the status quo in Egypt, which granted it great privilege. Many say that the military industrial complex controls up to 30 to 40% of Egypt's economy. So whether this military institution has a genuine interest in fundamental change to a civilian-led democracy in Egypt is a big question mark, and I would venture and say, quite frankly, no, they don't.
Well, Dina, thank you for that overview, for your assessment. Let me turn to Mohammed El-Shanawi, our VOA correspondent, who is also Egyptian, and he's on the scene. Mohammed, can you add or subtract anything to what Dina said, and also, what are you seeing and hearing on the ground?
Well, regarding the intention of the SCAF, it is now in doubt that they would let go after the election of the new parliament or a new president. The general feeling here in Cairo and in the country is that they are clinging to power, and they are using a new article in the proposed constitution, which is called Article number 9, that would give them the ultimate authority to be the guardian of the revolution, and that means they will be adopting the Turkish mode of generals controlling the political life for several years to come. And nobody is feeling comfortable about that, because the revolution was about changing the regime and looking forward for civilians to start ruling Egypt after over 60 years of military rule. And if you ask anybody, even in the street, he is concerned about this eventuality. However, if you ask the young activists of the revolution, they will tell you, well, we started the revolution on 25th of January 2011. There is another 25th of January coming around the corner, and there will be a continuation of the revolution till we achieve our goals. That's quote-unquote, from several of them that I met. So it's not like a done deal. Even when the SCAF started proposing this Article 9, there was a lot of rejection that caused the Council to rethink a way to modify it or dilute it a little bit. But nevertheless, people are not comfortable about the intentions. They are comparing what's going on in Egypt to what's going on in Tunisia. Tunisia was more appealing to them as an end game. They would like to see a constitution that would define the role of the upcoming president, and also define what kind of rule that would be in Egypt. Would it be a presidential or a parliamentary or a mix of the two? So people are very concerned about this clinging to power approach from the SCAF.
Pro-democracy activist Dina Girgis speaking to VOA's Carol Castiel, joined by our Mohammed El-Shanawi. Diplomats at the United Nations have failed to reach an agreement on a Palestinian application for UN membership. A UN Security Council committee on admitting new members met briefly today to approve a report that says it is deadlocked on the issue. A draft of the report was obtained by the media earlier this week. The committee began considering the request in September after Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas launched a bid to gain statehood recognition in the UN. However, Palestinians appear to have fallen short of the 9 approval votes needed in the 15-member Security Council. Also, the U.S. has threatened to veto the plan if it comes before the full council. The U.S. and other world powers have been urging the Palestinians and Israel to return to direct talks, which stalled a year ago. Palestinians say no talks can go forward unless Israel stops building new settlements on land that they want as part of a future state. When it comes to political awareness and use of online media, Palestinians are pretty savvy. When Tunisians were rallying to overthrow their government earlier this year using social media, Palestinians mobilized in support, but they were stopped by Palestinian Authority security forces. Political dissent is a complicated matter, and many find that online media is a popular way to express dissatisfaction with the way the territories are run. Some have even turned to spoof Twitter accounts to parody leaders to get their message across. Joining me now by phone from Ramallah is Rebecca Collard, VOA Superstringer correspondent. Welcome.
Hi.
So you just finished a story for us, kind of starting off looking at some of these parody Twitter accounts. Can you run us through some of the messages, and are they designed to be funny, pure parody, politically critical? How would you characterize them?
I think all of the above. I mean, they're very specific. They are talking about two of them are a parody of Salam Fayyad, who is the prime minister, and also Saeb Erekat, who is the negotiator, one of the chief negotiators for the Palestinians. So it's very much like he speaking from their first person, saying, you know, for example, with the UNESCO bid, this was something that was done outside of negotiations. So you have the spoof account of Saeb Erekat kind of saying, how is it possible that you could obtain this without negotiations? I wasn't there. You know, and I think it really strikes kind of the heart of what a lot of people feel here as far as negotiations go. Like, it's been almost 2 decades of negotiations. Most people here feel like these negotiations haven't achieved much. So why are we continuing?
It's interesting you say that because in our country, we've had like fake Steve Jobs, which is a blog and Twitter account, and people make fun of like business leaders. But the idea of actually impersonating, say, President Barack Obama, most people wouldn't think of doing. In fact, maybe illegal to do something like that. But Palestinians are actually bold in this regard. Is that true?
Yeah, I guess it's fairly bold, but I also think, I mean, there is a disclaimer on the profile that lets you know this isn't really the account. But if you just opened it and started reading it, you wouldn't necessarily know that. But whether it's a legal issue or not, I think that for Twitter, they probably require that somebody say that they are not actually this person, if that makes sense.
Right. Now, how popular is Mahmoud Abbas now after this UN bid, both in the UN General Assembly and UNESCO, and also some of his cabinet members like Salam Fayyad and Saeb Erekat?
Well, it's interesting. A recent poll showed his approval ratings around 50%, but at the same time, you have 70% of Palestinians believing that there's corruption in the authority that he runs, and it's a good question to ask why. If everybody thinks that his authority is corrupt and people are dissatisfied with negotiations, why they continue to support him? And I definitely think that this UN bid had a lot to do with it. It definitely increased his popularity here. And also at the same time, I don't think for Palestinians right now they see another natural leader. For many, Marwan Barghouti would be that natural leader. He's a Fatah leader, but he's in jail. So I think most Palestinians would have a hard time identifying a new leader.
Let's zoom out for a bit and just not look at Twitter, but any social media. That could be a blog, a political blog, maybe a Facebook page. What are the dangers of using social media to criticize Palestinian ruling authorities? I mean, are there any cases that jump out that might raise eyebrows for free speech activists?
There has not been a huge crackdown. There has been two cases which I speak about in the article. One of a journalist actually who had a graphic posted on his Facebook account of Mahmoud Abbas beside a character from this TV series, and this character was considered a traitor in the TV series, and the graphic was to imply that Mahmoud Abbas was a traitor, and he was arrested and detained for a while, but we're still not seeing this sort of social media crackdown that you've seen a lot of other places in the Arab world.
All right. One more question before I let you go. Palestinians obviously use Twitter and Facebook, but we haven't seen the kind of organization, like an Arab Spring scale of organization in the territories. Why do you think that is? It's not because they don't have access to it. Is the motivation or not there? Are they happy with the status quo?
No, it's difficult. I don't know. It's difficult to say with Palestinians. First of all, they don't have a Hosni Mubarak or a Ben Ali or one civic leader. They have kind of decades of occupation by Israel, plus a leadership that they're increasingly feeling is not acting in their interests. So I don't know if that sort of division, in some ways, kind of stops a mass mobilization. But you have Palestinians using all of these tools to organize, to have small protests, but it's been on a small scale. And also, for Palestinians, they have seen already 2 intifadas, and I think that they need good motivation to kind of rise up again.
All right, thanks for joining us. Rebecca Collard reporting from Ramallah for VOA. A watchdog group says Sudan is expanding its capacity to conduct airstrikes along the border with neighboring South Sudan. The Satellite Sentinel project says images from space show Sudan upgrading air bases it recently captured from rebels in Blue Nile State, which borders South Sudan. It says the upgrades include newly improved airstrips and new helicopter pads. The report comes a day after Sudan was accused of dropping 4 bombs around a refugee camp in South Sudan's Unity State on Thursday. A local South Sudanese official said the attack killed 12 people and wounded at least 20. Other reports said there were no casualties. Sudan denies bombing South Sudan's territory. And finally, the death toll of Wednesday's earthquake in the Turkish province of Van has risen to 17 after rescue workers recovered the bodies of 5 more victims earlier today. A senior disaster management official said Friday that authorities continue to search the rubble of a toppled 5-story hotel, although authorities no longer hear any signs of life coming from the structure. He says rescue workers hope to finish the search by midnight on Friday local time. There are concerns that freezing temperatures at night may threaten any potential survivors. This has been VOA's Middle East Monitor. Join us next week for news from the region, interest to the region. Coming up on International Edition, Thailand's floods threaten disease epidemics. Thanks for tuning to Voice of America.
If you're a news junkie and crave the latest news and analysis about the Middle East, follow us on our new and improved Twitter feed, VOA Middle East Wire.
You'll find us on Twitter at VOA Middle East. Every day, we tweet VOA's own special reports, analysis, VIP interviews, and podcasts. Plus, you'll get the latest buzz from VOA's entire Middle East producers and correspondents. VOA Middle East on Twitter. Get a read on the news before it happens.